Chapter 2294. Bailey Yan's life was very happy. Her parents and siblings treated her very well. The outside world also knew that Bailey Yan was a very obedient little beauty. Bailey Yan didn't dare to imagine how the outside world would view her if her pregnancy was exposed. Bailey Yan, who had created an obedient image since she was young, couldn't believe it. The feeling of falling into hell after being praised to heaven. Bailey Yan shook her head in panic. Just as she was about to stand up, she didn't know that she stepped on air, and her entire body fell down the cliff. The bottom of this cliff was the God-destroying rock. Even if a god fell down, he would definitely die. Bailey Yan was so scared that her face turned pale. However, the moment she wanted to use her spiritual power to save herself, she suddenly stopped. In the eyes of the world, people who were extremely outstanding since birth could not accept a stain in their lives. Some people would rather die than be accused of indecent behavior one day after they had lived a life of glory. For example, Bailey Yan. Bailey Yan wanted to give up struggling. She might as well fall into this bottomless abyss and fall into the God-destroying rock. If she died, everything would be over. Bailey Yan was a very strong-willed woman. She couldn't accept being raped and still acting as if nothing had happened. Closing her eyes, Bailey Yan was about to fall off the cliff. However, before Bailey Yan could fall off the cliff, a slender hand grabbed her. For a long time, Bailey Yan didn't feel the feeling of falling off a cliff. When she opened her eyes, she saw an angry, handsome face staring at her. The owner of this handsome face stared at her for 2 seconds and said angrily, "The God-destroying rock is at the bottom of the cliff. Do you want to die?" The person who came was none other than the Lord. Since the last time he forced Bailey Yan, this was the first time the Lord appeared in front of Bailey Yan. However, for the past 4 months, the Lord went to the Bailey family almost every day to see Bailey Yan. The day also fell. He just didn't dare to appear in front of Bailey Yan. He was afraid that Bailey Yan would be emotional if she saw him. Today, when Bailey Yan left the Bailey family and came to this mountain, the Lord followed behind Bailey Yan. He saw that she seemed to be looking for something, so he followed her all the way. Thinking that the God-destroying rock was at the bottom of this mountain, he wanted to follow her and protect her. However, the Lord never thought that Bailey Yan actually wanted to end her life. She actually dared. When he thought of how Bailey Yan had closed her eyes and planned to directly fall off the cliff into the God-slaying rock and lose her life, the Master God's heart tightened. He was so scared that his face suddenly turned pale. He tightly grabbed Bailey Yan's hand and roared those words. Seeing the sudden appearance of the Lord God, Bailey Yan was so frightened that she reflexively wanted to take a step back. He even forgot that there was a cliff behind him and that the God-destroying rock was at the bottom of the cliff. Seeing this, the chief god flew into a rage. "You stupid woman, do you want to die so badly? Good. Do you want to die? Since you want to die, you might as well be the woman beneath me. Anyway, it wasn't the first time. Get some benefits for your Bailey clan and serve me well before you die." These words were definitely uttered by the sovereign in a fit of anger. Bailey Yan was frightened by the Master God's appearance. However, before Bailey Yan could react, the Lord God had already grabbed her hand and brought her to the temple in a flash. After bringing Bailey Yan back to the bedroom in the temple, the Lord God threw Bailey Yan onto the bed and quickly stripped off her clothes. However, the moment the Lord God was about to enter Bailey Yan, his gaze fell on Bailey Yan's originally slender, but now slightly arched lower abdomen. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful book mobile version reading website. .com. Chapter 2295. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. When the Master God saw Bailey Yan's obviously protruding belly, he stopped his actions of forcing Bailey Yan. Bailey Yan was also stunned. She did not expect that the Lord God would bring her back to the temple and strip her of her clothes to force himself on her. However, Bailey Yan only reacted when she was stripped of her clothes. At this moment she was not wearing anything. Not only that, it had been 5 months since the Lord God forced himself on her. During these 5 months, Bailey Yan had been hesitating whether she should kill the child in her belly. However, she could not bring herself to do it. After 5 months, her belly grew bigger. Bailey Yan was more and more afraid that her pregnancy would be discovered. Hence, she wore thicker and thicker clothes. Even on hot days, Bailey Yan would wear thick cotton-padded jackets. However, if this continued, she would not be able to hide her protruding belly at 6 or 7 months. Hence, Bailey Yan was anxious. Today, she heard that there was a kind of herb used for abortion in the nearby mountains. Bailey Yan quickly went to pick it. However, she did not expect to meet the Lord God. He even got angry for no reason and brought her to the temple. He wanted to do the same thing to her 5 months ago. Of course, all of this was not the main point. The main point was that she was pregnant. 5 months pregnant, her belly would not be obvious if she wore thick clothes. However, the Lord God had stripped her of all her clothes in a fit of anger just now. In this way, her protruding belly was completely exposed before his eyes. While the Lord God was in a daze, Bailey Yen hurriedly lifted up the corner of the blanket to cover her stomach and her private parts. She glanced to the side and very uncomfortably reached out to pick up the pile of clothes that the Lord God had taken off. However, before she could pick up the pile of clothes that the Lord God had taken off, Bailey Yan's slender wrist was grabbed by the Lord God. At the same time, the Lord God's magnetic male voice suddenly sounded. There was a hint of wild joy in his words. "You're pregnant." Although the Lord God didn't have any experience, he wasn't stupid. Bailey Yan's protruding belly was different from being fat. That round, ball-like protruding belly was a sign of pregnancy. Seeing the overjoyed look on the Lord God's face, Bailey Yen was so scared that her face suddenly changed. She covered her stomach, lowered her head and rolled her eyes. She couldn't help but defend herself. "No. I've been eating a lot lately, so I've gotten fatter." "What? Can't I get fat?" Bailey Yan's tone was very unfriendly. After saying this, Bailey Yen pushed the Lord God away. Then she put on her clothes and ran out of the house. She absolutely could not let him find out that she was pregnant. She would definitely secretly abort the child in her belly. However, before Bailey Yen could run out of the Lord God's bedroom, the Lord God grabbed her wrist and pressed her against the door. "Not pregnant? Then why did you go up the mountain? Are you looking for herbs that can remove my child?" The Lord God was both surprised and angry. He was angry that she had kept her pregnancy a secret for 5 months and didn't even tell him. He was surprised that he was going to be a father. Bailey Yen, whose thoughts were exposed, stubbornly wanted to pull her hand back from the Lord God's hand. However, she realized that there was nothing she could do. Bailey Yen looked at the Lord God with a hateful gaze, then said angrily, Yes, that's right. I'm pregnant, but it's not your child." "What? Do you really think that I can't have you? I found another man to give birth to this child." Bailey Yen had just said this when her mouth was blocked. The Lord God angrily blocked Bailey Yan's red lips and kissed her for a while. When he let go of Bailey Yen couldn't even breathe. The Lord God obviously didn't want to let Bailey Yen go. He angrily pushed Bailey Yen to the edge of the bed and pressed down on her. "You found another man after doing it with me? Fine, then I'll personally examine your body and see if you found another man." Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Chapter 2296. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, page 1/1. Bailey Yen was eaten by the main god again. However, this time, the main god was careful as if he was afraid of hurting the child in Bailey Yan's womb. Although Bailey Yen did not like how the main god treated her, it was different from the first time. She was indeed moved by the main god's gentle treatment. However, Bailey Yen was a very stubborn person. In Bailey Yan's opinion, he had forced her. Even if the second time really made her feel good, Bailey Yen just couldn't forget what the Lord God had done to her back then. He had raped her. Not long after, Bailey Yan's pregnancy was discovered by the Bailey family. The main god also came to ask for Bailey Yan's hand in marriage. He stood up fearlessly and directly admitted that the child in Bailey Yan's womb was his. He was the one who had forced Bailey Yen to have sex with him. Since then, the Bailey family did not dare to say anything to the main god. After all, the main god was the ruler of the gods' continent at this time. They could only agree to marry Bailey Yen to the main god. After Bailey Yen married the main god, she gave birth to a child. The child was named the Divine Lord. However, ever since Bailey Yen married the main god, she was unhappy. After the child was born, Bailey Yen did not fulfill her duty as a mother. Every time the main god had sex with her, Bailey Yen did not make a fuss. She allowed the main god to do whatever he wanted. She lived like a puppet. In the end, she did not even have any emotions. In the end, the main god had no choice but to let Bailey Yen return to the Bailey family. He would occasionally send someone to bring the Divine Lord to the Bailey family to see his mother. The main god would secretly go to the Bailey family to see Bailey Yen. After that, he never appeared in front of Bailey Yen again. For the next few thousand years, the two of them were stubborn and never met face to face again. Later on, the main god was injured by a mysterious person. The temple was destroyed, and the main god was brought to the Bailey family by Ce. Of course, before that, when the main god let Bailey Yen return to the Bailey family, he changed his appearance to that of an old man in his 50s or 60s. He never changed back. Without Bailey Yan's company, he had already planned to live the rest of his life with the appearance of an old man. However, he didn't expect that after being injured he would regain his original handsome looks and look 80% like CE. This memory was something that happened tens of thousands of years ago. At this moment, his soul returned to reality. Now, tens of thousands of years had passed. Bailey Yan, who had been stubborn and arrogant back then, no longer hated the Lord God for forcing her. But Bailey Yan just couldn't bring herself to accept his goodwill. Bailey Yan's waist was about to break after being pulled by the Lord God. She held her waist and neatly buttoned up the clothes on her body. Then she was about to walk out. Before she could leave, the sovereign pulled her back. Yan, sleep a little longer. Sleep? Sleep on your own if you want to sleep. Get out of the Bailey family for me. After saying that, Bailey Yan flung away the Master God's hand and strode forward to drag the Master God out of bed. However, Bailey Yan's words, which were supposed to be insults, didn't sound like a curse when they came out of her mouth. Her voice was soft and weak, but in the Master God's ears, it sounded like she was acting coquettishly. It was very comfortable. The Master God grabbed Bailey Yan's hand and was about to do something unsuitable for children with Bailey Yan again. The voice of the Bailey family's subordinate came from outside the door. "Miss, the Lord God is here." Hearing this, Bailey Yan pushed the Master God away. "My son is back. Get out of my way, you old fart." Although these words were very fierce when they came out of Bailey Yan's mouth, it gave people a feeling of tenderness as if she was flirting. "That's my son too." The Master God chuckled and got out of bed. The subordinate who reported the Lord God's arrival waited at the door for a while before seeing Bailey Yan walk out. The subordinate was just about to turn around when he saw the Master God, who looked 80% like CE, walk out of Bailey Yan's room. When he saw the Master God, the subordinate was stunned. The subordinate even rubbed his eyes to make sure that he wasn't seeing things. This person was really the Master God. Everyone on the God's continent knew about the grudge between the Master God and Bailey Yan. But what was going on today? Did the sun rise from the west? The Master God and Bailey Yan walked out of the same room? Did they make up? Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios.